Hey guys, Chris here with the Good Old Gamer. So we're through August 2019, and August really wasn't a terribly exciting month. We got AIB cards for the 5700 series, and those came out pretty cool. And this month I think we're going to get some new announcements from AMD for their upcoming GPUs for the holiday season. Maybe it'll be next month, but here pretty soon. So not a whole lot of questions to go through from you guys, so I'm going to be able to get through most of them. So let's go ahead and start talking about this stuff. All right, so kicking things off with Swift Talks Tech over here. He's got, what's the reaction of people getting Tesla GPUs over the 8000, 9000, and 200 series, and then finally getting Fermi? So what I think he's trying to say is back in the day when, there was the 8800 series, the 9800 series, and then the GTX 200 series. Nobody really had a problem with it, them continuing to use the same architecture. I'm assuming that's what you're asking, getting the same architecture over and over again. I mean, with AMD, we've had GCN since 2012, I believe. It's 2019, and we're just now changing. There's nothing wrong with a manufacturer keeping an architecture as long as they keep improving performance. So nobody really had a problem with it from that perspective. The only real issue was that the 8000 series and the 200 series, when they launched, they were pretty expensive. So that's really the only gripe that there was back in the day on those. All right, so this next question is from Cade, another member over on Discord. I think I'm getting too old for this. Do you ever get the feeling that the entire gaming scene just is not worth it anymore? The time, the money, the vitriol, etc. Yes. Yeah, I definitely feel where you're coming from on this one. As a community, it's broadened out so much here in the past few years. I mean, you've always had the younger crowd typically on consoles. That's the way it was back in the early 2000s and the 1990s. Pretty much kids were on consoles, and then the, grown-ups were on PCs, because PCs cost significantly more. They still do, but not nearly as much as they used to. So you have a much wider audience today. There's way more people out there, and it looks like most game developers are targeting the most broad audience possible. That's why games are becoming very, very bland and safe. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. They're meant for casual people. They want to get everybody playing their game instead of saying, we're going to target this 5% of the gaming community. Now, there are other developers out there understanding that it's smarter to target a certain audience instead of trying to make a game that's for everyone. And you're starting to see this come in with like games journalists. They have their own opinions on where things should go. And when people don't do what they want, they get upset. And then when people do what they want, the customers get upset. So we have a lot of different things going on because everybody thinks that their opinion should matter to the entire community, when in reality, everybody kind of fits into small little segments. I think there's 3 billion gamers in the world now. We're talking about most of the human population at this point. So saying that everybody should fit into one category doesn't make sense, and I think that's what some people are starting to figure out. Once they do figure this out, start targeting direct audiences, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's definitely not worth the time and the money right now, honestly. If you're getting into gaming, you might as well just buy something old and cheap, and you have a good backlog of about 30 years of gaming to get through before you can even get, to current. So I would just play all of that stuff. Once that's done, 20 or 30 years from now, when you're done with that, then maybe look at what's coming out now or at that point. But that's just my thought. Okay, from Deputy Avalon, are you going to do a separate day trading channel? Just a mini series where you talk about it for a bit? No, I'm not going to do any of that kind of stuff. That's what I do primarily for my primary source of income. I actually changed things up a little bit, started trading options instead of stocks, and have had a good month. I'm up about $1,000 considering I've been using very small amounts of money. Very successful month here this month, and that's going to continue. Now, that's me personally. I don't mind talking about that kind of thing, but normally what I'll do is I actually check out a channel. It's called Us versus Herd. It's a really cool channel. The guy that runs it, his name's Nick. He's pretty cool. If you want to join that community, I'm there pretty frequently on the daily live streams that he does after the markets close and kind of chat with them. And I'm also a part of the Discord over there. I don't really talk too much in it, but at the same time, if you guys want to go check out his stuff, I'm usually there, and I don't mind talking about stocks on the Discord server. There's a little section for that if you want to talk about that kind of thing. I'll give you my opinion, but other than that, that's for me personally. That's how I generate most of my income, and I just don't want to give out advice and people lose money. You know, because if I lose $100, I don't really care. I'll just make $500 the next day. But, you know, if you lose $100 and get frustrated, like, I'd feel a little bit bad about that. So I don't really want to be responsible for other people's money. But if you want to just talk about it and get opinions, I'm always cool with that. Okay, and this one's from Me Too Lethal. If AMD makes a 2080 Ti Killer, do you think that it'll be below $700 or over? Well, it depends on what we define as a killer. Is it significantly faster, or is it like on par? So if it's something like the 5700 XT versus the 2070 Super, where they kind of trade blows, 2070 Super is a little bit faster overall, I think it'll be $699 MSRP, and then the AIB cards will be about $50 more. Now, if it's significantly faster, 20-30% faster, which I don't think that card would be out until next year sometime, probably right before or right after the 3080 Ti or whatever the next generation will be. So I don't think the 2080 Ti would really matter at that point. But I do think that AMD will charge as much as possible if they do have the top tier card. If they come out with something that's, let's say, 30% faster than a 2080 Ti, the 3080 Ti isn't out yet and not announced, so there's no time frame on it. So AMD's king of the hill, and let's say the 2080 Ti's are still $1,200. Yeah, they'll probably charge $1,500 or $2,000 for them, because why not? There's people out there that spend $1,200 on video cards. There's people out there that spend $2,500 on Titans and all this other stuff. So yeah, this is something Tom and I talked about in his the last podcast that we did together in his Broken Silicon. And yeah, I mean, if people are going to keep paying it, prices are going to keep going up. Whether that's $10,000, $100,000, $10 million per GPU. If people pay it, that's what they're going to charge. And unfortunately, it's just going to get worse until it gets better. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name here. I do apologize. But why did you run the Vega 56 at 1250 megahertz on your comparison video? Well, this actually was explained in that video. First off, the major limitation of the Vega 56 reference is its cooler. It's too loud at stock. At 50% fan speed, the thing is absurdly loud. It's to the point that the average person is not going to put up with it. So we were limited by the cooling solution first and foremost. So what we had to do was figure out a noise level that was tolerable. For me, that was 35% fan speed, absolute max. I was not okay with it going 1% beyond 35. So we set that there. So now we have a thermal limit as to how hot the thing can get. So then we had to figure out how much power that the 35% fan speed could cool, and that turned out to be about 150 watts. And then we just allowed the GPU to utilize that power however it needed to make things work. Undervolting helped out a little bit, but that meant that the GPU could only run between 1250 and 1350 megahertz, remaining at that noise level and at that power target. So it started off with noise being the primary limiter, which then turned into a power limiter because at that fan speed, it can only cool so much. And then at that particular point, then it's just up to the GPU to use the resources that were available. And just turned out that that was the range that it had. So for me, I don't care about pure clock speed. I would rather have it run at 1 gigahertz, rather have it run at 500 megahertz than 2 gigahertz, but screaming loud and annoying and pulling 5,000 watts. You have to balance things out. So there's some people out there that don't care. They're like, oh, I use headphones. Well, okay, that's what you do. Some of my PCs are out in the living room, and having something screaming its ears out, it's just not that good. And the reason why I did that video was for the average person out there who might be interested in buying a reference model, which it works fine. You just have to limit it. You put certain limits on the card, make it perform within those limits, and then I showed you the performance when it was at those limits. So that's why I did it, because for me, that's a much better use case than running that fan way too fast, way too loud, just to push out, more heat and run the GPU in a less efficient state. So that's why I did that. Okay, from Sensen W. Do you think that will be any improvements to the performance from the late 5700 XT custom designs? I mean, why would the Nitro Plus even exist if it wasn't for, in some way, to extend overclocking? Well, we pretty much got it from there. Okay, so basically his question is, why even bother having AIB cards? To make them cooler and quieter, and to throw RGB and stuff on them. That's it. The reference 5700 XT will perform as well as the most expensive AIB card. There's no difference in terms of pure performance. It's just down to aesthetics, and it comes down to acoustics. So yeah, there's no reason to invest in like some big mega triple fan 5700 XT. Once I saw the reviews for the Pulse, the Sapphire Pulse, which is basically the same cooler that I have on my RX 580, at that point I realized, I'm like, that works. It does the job. It keeps it cool, keeps it quiet. It's smaller than these big triple fan designs, and it just works. Now, there's people out there that want a certain aesthetic, certain RGB colors, they want all this other stuff, and guess what? The companies out there are going to charge you more money for all of that. And that's how it goes. So yeah, there's literally no reason at all to buy a big mega AIB card. And this goes for NVIDIA as well, because they only overclock to a certain point as well. I mean, we're basically technologically limited by the certain manufacturing process. So at the end of the day, that's really what it is. You're spending more money for different, might be a little bit quieter, might run a little bit cooler, and then that's it. Might look better. That's why you spend money on, bigger, badder AIB cards. There's no practical reason for it, if that's what you were asking. All right, so I'm going to butcher this name here, but we got Derb Madindistera. Sorry. Why is everyone talking about Ryzen not reaching the advertised clock speeds? Well, I can touch on that real quick. But no one cares that the system is way louder after upgrading from the 3000 series. So, see here, this guy's very pissed off about the acoustics. Acoustics are very important to this person, so they might want a different AIB card. Perfect example. But anyways, I really like my 3700X, but it's constantly ramping up and down due to basically due to it boosting up and down. Okay, so yeah, I've noticed this as well. It's not just the 3000 series. I updated my B350 motherboard, and I got the 2600X in there, and it does the same thing. So I'm thinking it's part of the new Giza, where the monitoring software is probably more attuned to what's going on. Now, this is something that AMD probably should fix, make it a little bit more tolerant. Even if it spikes up for like, let's say 3 milliseconds, even if your CPU spikes up to 100 degrees C or 125 or whatever the TJ Max is, for like a nanosecond, some very short amount of time, that doesn't matter. They need to figure out the tuning on something like that to where, yeah, a more constant fan curve would make sense. Best thing to do is figure out what your fan speed sounds like at its maximum that you're okay with. So, for example, kind of like what I did in the Vega 56 video, find the maximum acoustic level that's okay with you, and then just make sure that you set your fan curve to that be the maximum. Run something like Prime 95, make sure that that maximum setting is capable enough to keep temperatures down for the most part. When you're doing a stress like that, under 85C, because you're doing an unrealistic workload, is probably the best way to go. So just adjust your fan curve for now, but I believe it's just something to do with the new BIOS updates. All right, so this next question is from Sim Gunther. Would you want a laptop with desktop parts that you can swap in and out, or a desktop with laptop parts, which you can never swap? Well, honestly, this is actually a good question, because me personally, I'm thinking about getting rid of all of my desktops and moving on over to something like the Zotac Magnus, which is basically like a Nintendo Wii-sized computers. You can't really swap much. You can swap out the CPUs a little bit and obviously add storage and whatnot in there. But due to its much smaller size profile, portability, if I do need that, which I probably won't, but if I did, it's there. It would make it easy to swap from room to room, which that I could use. So for me personally, getting the much better quality silicon from laptops into desktops is more interesting to me. Now, that's not going to be for everybody because that throws price to performance right out the window. You have to pay a massive premium for that much higher quality silicon, about twice as much on your GPUs. So like a $300 desktop GPU would cost you $600, $700, $800 in the small form factor, but you are getting much better top of the line silicon versus the dregs that you get in desktop. They also run cooler, quieter, and all that fun stuff. So for me personally, I'm cool with not swapping parts, just buying a box, being good with it for 4 or 5 years. And then if I want to put it on a shelf, it doesn't take up a lot of space. So that's kind of the way that I look at it. Okay, next question is from Sir Nicholas. I saw an article talking about PCIe 4 could allow for uncompressed audio to be more of a real option now, and curious if you've heard about this. Uncompressed audio has been available in games for this entire generation. This was one of the big controversies about the original Titanfall being, I think, like 50 or 60 gigabytes or whatever it was. It's because they uncompressed the audio because the CPUs in this generation console are so weak that they didn't want to waste CPU cycles actually getting, uncompressing audio. So that's a thing. We already have that. So PCIe 4 is not necessary for any of that. And honestly, I would go the other direction, and I want to actually see more compression going back into games. Game sizes have gotten out of control. I think the new Gears of War is 110, 120 gigs, something crazy like that. Games need to get under 30 gigabytes again. We need to compress the shit out of textures and audio. They need to be much, much smaller because I don't care how fast your internet is, downloading 30 gigs over and over and over again, 100 gigs over and over and over again is bad. Getting that down to like 30, that's okay. So with next generation consoles having much more powerful CPUs, I believe that game developers will go back to compressing audio and compressing, textures a lot heavier because the next gen consoles will have enough CPU grunt to decompress them on the fly. So yeah, I think we're actually going to go towards more compression, not less compression, which is kind of where we're at now. Okay, this is from JSSR. I've heard that GPUs that can handle ray tracing will be mandatory in the next 4 to 5 years. Wonder where you heard that from. Okay, if this is true, do you think that this will negatively affect pricing on mid-range GPUs? It already has. Ray tracing has already negatively affected mid-range GPUs. This time next year, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so basically that's the big question there. Do I think that ray tracing is going to become mandatory? No, because ray tracing, as I pointed out in my last video, the ray tracing that NVIDIA is doing now is not going to be what's being done 5 years from now. NVIDIA's proprietary technology never goes anywhere and never gets adopted by the mass mainstream out there. If it's not open source, it doesn't get used. It's that simple. NVIDIA needs to learn that. If they wanted to push RTX, they'd need to make it open source, get rid of the black boxes, and make sure that it can run on everybody's hardware. They're not going to do that, so it's going away. Whatever AMD starts rolling out in about 5 years, that's probably what's going to take over. Ray tracing as a whole, like I said, for me, it's just kind of a gimmick. I don't think it's ever going to really breach gimmick status unless they have a massive breakthrough in technology that can actually allow for it. So it's one of those, the technology's not even there yet, so I wouldn't worry about ray tracing at all for probably the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, so from Clarence007, would you say the Hyper 212 or its equivalents are good enough for something like the i7-9700K if you're not overclocking? Well, the Hyper 212 or something, basically a 4 copper heat pipe, 120 millimeter cooler, yeah, that's more than enough for a Hyper 212 and pretty much any CPU out there. In reality, if the 212 is not good enough for the CPU, meaning if it's not capable enough to cool it, there's something wrong with the CPU. There's nothing wrong with your cooler. The 212 should be able to handle overclocking, this and that. At this stage of the game, I wouldn't waste my time overclocking anyway. However, I also wouldn't waste my time on a 9700K then. Just get yourself a 9700. Save yourself 20, 30 bucks, whatever it is, because if you're not overclocking, why waste the money? Okay, next question is from Drexel Dude. Seems that most AIBs for the RX 5700 XT GPUs are within a couple percent plus or minus of each other. So it comes down to acoustics and temps. So this is exactly what we were talking about before. But for the same money, you can get a used GTX 1080 Ti, which performs close to the top in most of these benchmarks. Okay, so I mean, yeah, the 1080 Ti is an alternative option to something like the 5700 XT or the 2070 Super. They all perform basically the same. The 1080 Ti is not really much faster, and none of them are really much slower. It's just going to be game to game. So, yeah, I mean, they're about $450 to $500 on eBay. The biggest thing is it's using an old architecture, a really old architecture. Pascal's based off Maxwell, which came out in 2014. So it's 2019 now, soon 2020. So are you going to spend $450 on 6-year-old technology? That's going against it. It does have more VRAM, so that's a positive, but it is still more expensive than the 5700 XT. So no, I would not recommend a 1080 Ti over $450 used 1080 Ti. Does not make sense when you can get a $400 to $420 5700 XT, which is maybe 2 or 3% slower. I would go that route. It's brand new. Get an AIB card. Once they're available, they should be hopefully available to the masses here in the next couple of weeks. Okay, next one is from Steven Savage. Thinking back to when you felt the channel was struggling in its infancy, and you asked the community for some ideas to steer the channel in a more positive direction in terms of viewership. How does it feel that you're nearing 25,000 subscribers? That's a monumental accomplishment, and I'd like to speak about how you reached such a turning point in the channel, and really proud of the way we did this. Thank you. Oop, knocking into the stuff. Well, thank you, Steven. I do appreciate your support there. Yeah, we've come a long way with the channel. As I've mentioned to Paul and Tom, and maybe on this channel, you know, there really weren't any PC or tech commentary channels back when I started. It was like either you're a reviewer or that was about it. You were basically classified as a reviewer if you talked about tech at all. And yeah, so it was really kind of strange figuring out like what the channel was, because I don't want to review stuff. Sometimes I want to test things out myself, kind of more interesting niche things, you know, just fun things to check out. But I don't want to do reviews. I have no interest in sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours on end. Instead, figuring out that my place was more whittling through the BS and basically giving it to people straight, figuring out that there was a lot of people out there that really preferred people just, you know, saying it how it was. And yeah, once I figured that out, then things became a lot easier. Obviously, when I was working like 3 jobs, you know, that was also really, really difficult. So yeah, we pushed through some tough times. Things are going really good now. And I do appreciate everybody who's supported the channel for, what are we at now? Almost 3.5 years. It's been going for a long time. So I really want to thank all of you guys for all of your support, sticking with it. And I hope you really like, you know, where we're going with all this stuff. Okay, this is from Trench Coats for Life. As I'm upgrading a build to a brand new computer at the end of this year and hoping for the 5800 XT that comes out by then, this is what I want to get. He wants the game at 1440p and do VR. He's going to have a 3900X, which is unnecessary for gaming. You're better off with a 3600 or a 3600X. Don't waste money on CPUs if it's just for gaming. If you're doing some workloads on there that you could use it for, fine. But save money. There's no reason for a 3900X. So basically his question is, should he get a 5700 XT or wait for the possible 5800 XT? Well, it's going to be coming out sooner or later. So it really comes down to how long you can wait. From my predictions, we're probably looking at 2080 Ti-ish level performance. So for 1440p max settings, the big thing is VR. That might be really helpful, having that extra performance. So if you can wait, I would honestly say it's worth waiting. I'd give it probably 2 months. If you don't hear anything in September or October from AMD, it's probably going to be much further out than that. So at that point, you might want to pick up some good deals on a 5700 XT around the holiday season and just go that route. Because at that point, you have no idea when it's coming out. But I'm hoping that, you know, they should come out sometime towards the end of this year. It would make sense that they'd want them out for the holiday season. So I'd give it a month or two and then make your decision. But the big thing is for gaming, I wouldn't waste my money on a 3900X. Okay, guys, so last question here. This is from Ruben Nunez. Was the 5700 a replacement for the RX 580? No, there is no replacement for the RX 580 yet. And then let's see. Is the 64 ROPS the new norm for Navi's generational performance gains? Is it the new norm? I don't think so. They'll probably drop it down to 32 on the 5600 series and below. And then obviously that can change, could go even lower if they needed to. And is that responsible for the gains? No. There's a massive, massive amount of architectural changes inside of Navi. I mean, this isn't just GCN with some stuff tweaked to it. It's different. It's completely different architecture. And that's where they got significant improvements to performance per CU, performance per watt. I mean, it's a much better architecture than GCN. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons why it's not a replacement for the 5800. 5800 has no replacement at this point in time. Something that should be replacing the $250 price point should be close to 1070, GTX 1070 level performance. AMD does not currently have a card at a, GTX 1070. So basically something like a 1660 Ti card would be a real replacement to the GTX 1060 6GB and RX 580. And even that costs too much money. If that was 230, 250, that's where that card should be. Well, alrighty guys, that's going to wrap up the August Q&A. It's been really fun. Got some really good questions here because there wasn't a lot of news. People had to get kind of creative with their questions. So I really did enjoy going through the questions for this particular month. Hopefully we get some new stuff going on. The channel, like I said, cutting back on videos because there's not a whole lot to talk about. So I'd rather do one really good video per week than do like 3 or 4 that really don't matter that much. As far as like doing a lot of those benchmark videos, they didn't do too well on the channel, so I'm probably not going to be doing those unless I get a wild hair up my butt. So we're probably going to stop on that. But yeah, other than that, I'm expecting some cool stuff going on. The CPU market, Tom from Moore's Law is Dead, he's been talking a lot about this. Looks like that's going to get really interesting. I'm really interested to see what happens with the next generation consoles. Looking at how good Gears of War 5 looks and performs on an Xbox One X is really, really great to see. I also want to see how the PC performance for that game comes out. If an RX 580, R9 390 class GPU, if it performs similarly to that of the Xbox One X, or maybe Microsoft did some secret optimizations. I'm really curious there, but the game looks great on consoles. So yeah, so I'm kind of interested to see what other people come up with that. I might talk about it here on the channel if I find anything interesting there. If you guys have any suggestions and you're Patreon members, please jump over to Discord. We do have a video suggestion section. Go ahead and drop in your ideas there, or you can leave them down in the comment section below. Well, alrighty guys, that's all I have for today, and I will catch you guys in the next video.